Welcome back to The Princess Bride. And we left off last time with Count Rugen finally preparing the machine to be used on Wesley. And we don't know what it is, and it's just called the machine. And whatever it does, we know it's deadly because it's been tested on a wild dog, and the wild dog was killed by the machine. And now we're going to get to the beginning of the machine being applied to Wesley and see what happens with that. And remember, we also have Inigo in the Thieves' Quarter waiting for Vizzini, and Fezzik, last time we knew, was in some cave across the Florin Channel near that fishing village. So something must be going on with them. We're going to catch back up with what they're doing, and we'll see how this chapter turns out. Let's continue. "Well, could you sleep?" the Count asked the next night upon his arrival in the cage. "Quite honestly, no," Wesley replied in his normal voice. Remember, he'd been faking being weak and beaten. "I'm glad you're being honest with me. I'll be honest with you. No more charades between us," the Count said, putting down a number of notebooks and quill pens and ink bottles. "I must carefully track your reactions," he explained. "In the name of science?" The Count nodded. "If my experiments are valid, my name will last beyond my body. It's immortality I'm after, to be quite honest." He adjusted a few knobs on the machine. "I suppose you're naturally curious as to how this works." "I spent the night pondering, and I know no more than when I started. It appears to be a great conglomeration of soft-rimmed cups of infinitely varied sizes, together with a wheel and a dial and a lever, and what it does is beyond me." "Also glue," added the Count, pointing to a small tub of thick stuff, "to keep the cups attached." And with that, he set to work, taking cup after cup, touching the soft rims with glue, and setting them against Wesley's skin. "Eventually, I'll have to put one on your tongue, too," the Count said, "but I'll save that for last in case you have any questions." "This certainly isn't the easiest thing to set up, is it?" "I'll be able to fix that in later models," the Count said. "At least those are my present plans." And he kept right on putting cup after cup on Wesley's skin until every inch of exposed surface was covered. "So much for the outside," the Count said then. "This next is a bit more delicate. Try not to move." "I'm chained hand, head, and foot," Wesley said. "How much movement do you think I'm capable of? Are you really as brave as you sound, or are you a little frightened? The truth, please. This is for posterity, remember." "I'm a little frightened," Wesley replied. The Count jotted that down, along with the time. Then he got down to the fine work, and soon there were tiny, tiny soft-rimmed cups on the insides of Wesley's nostrils, against his eardrums, under his eyelids, above and below his tongue, and before the Count arose, Wesley was covered inside and out with the things. "Now, all I do," the Count said very loudly, hoping Wesley could hear, "is get the wheel going to its fastest spin so I can have more than enough power to operate. And the dial can be set from 1 to 20, and this being the first time, I will set it at the lowest setting, which is 1. And then, all I need to do is push the lever forward, and we should, if I haven't gummed it up, be in full operation." But Wesley, as the lever moved, took his brain away. And when the machine began, Wesley was stroking her autumn-colored hair and touching her skin of wintry cream, and then his world exploded. Because the cups were everywhere, and before they had punished his body but left his brain, only not the machine. The machine reached everywhere. His eyes were not his to control, and his ears could not hear her gentle loving whisper, and his brain slid away, slid far from the love into the deep vault of despair, hit hard, fell again, down through the house of agony, into the county of pain. Inside and out, Wesley's world was ripping apart, and he could do nothing but crack along with it. The Count turned off the machine then, and as he picked up his notebooks, he said, "As you no doubt know, the concept of the suction cup is centuries old. Well, basically, that's all this is. Except instead of water, I'm sucking life. I've just sucked away 1 year of your life. Later, I'll set the dial higher, certainly to 2 or 3, perhaps even a 5. Theoretically, 5 should be 5 times more severe than what you've just endured. So please be specific in your answers. Tell me now, honestly, how do you feel? In humiliation and suffering and frustration and anger and anguish so great it was dizzying, Wesley cried like a baby. Interesting, said the Count, and carefully noted it down. It took Yellen a week to get his enforcers together in sufficient number together with an adequate brute squad, and so, 5 days before the wedding, he stood at the head of his company awaiting the speech of the prince. This was in the castle courtyard, and when the prince appeared, the Count was, as usual, with him, although, not as usual, the Count seemed preoccupied. Which of course he was, though Yellen had no way of knowing that. The Count had sucked 10 years from Wesley this past week, and with the life of a 65 that was average for a Florinese male, the victim had approximately 30 years remaining, assuming he was about 25 when they started experimenting. But how best to go about dividing that? The Count was simply in a quandary. So many possibilities, but which would prove, scientifically, most interesting? The Count sighed. Life was never easy. You are here, the prince began, because there may be another plot against my beloved. I charge each and every one of you with being her personal protector. I want the thieves' quarter empty, and all the inhabitants jailed 24 hours before my wedding. Only then will I rest easy. Gentlemen, I beg you, think of this mission as being an affair of the heart, and I know you will not fail. With that he pivoted, and followed by the Count, hurried from the courtyard, leaving Yellen in command. The conquest of the thieves' quarter began immediately. Yellen worked long and hard at it each day, but the thieves' quarter was a mile square, so there was much to do. Most of the criminals had been through unjust and illegal roundups before, so they offered little resistance. They knew the jails were not celled enough for all of them, so if it meant a few days' incarceration, what did it matter? There was, however, a second group of criminals, those who realized that capture meant, for various past performances, death, and these, without exception, resisted. In general, Yellen, through adroit handling of the brute squad, was able to bring these bad fellows, eventually, under control. Still, 36 hours before the sunset wedding, there were half a dozen holdouts left in the thieves' quarter. Yellen arose at dawn, and, tired and confused, not one of the captured criminals seemed to come from Gilder. He gathered the best of the brute squad and led them into the thieves' quarter for what simply had to be the final foray. Yellen went immediately to Falkbridge's alehouse, first sending all save 2 brutes off on various tasks, keeping a noisy one and a quiet one for his own needs. He knocked on Falkbridge's door and waited. Falkbridge was by far the most powerful man in the thieves' quarter. He seemed almost to own half of it, and there wasn't a crime of any dimension he wasn't behind. He always avoided arrest, and everyone except Yellen thought Falkbridge must be bribing somebody. Yellen knew he was bribing somebody, since every month, rain or shine, Falkbridge came to Yellen's house and gave him a satchel full of money. "Ho!" Falkbridge called from inside the alehouse. "The chief of all enforcement in Florence City, accompanied by brutes," Yellen replied. Completeness was one of his virtues. "Oh!" Falkbridge opened the door. For a power, he was very unimposing, short and chubby. "Come in." Yellen entered, leaving the 2 brutes in the doorway. "Get ready and be quick," Yellen said. "Hey, Yellen, it's me," Falkbridge said softly. I know, Yellen said softly right back. "But please, do me a favor and get ready." "Pretend I did. I'll stay in the alehouse, I promise. I got enough food, no one will ever know." "The prince is without mercy," Yellen said. "If I let you stay and I'm found out, then it's it for me." "I've been paying you 20 years to stay out of jail. You're a rich man, just so I don't have to go to jail. Where's the logic of me paying you and no advantages?" "I'll make it up to you. I'll get you the best cell in Florence City. Don't you trust me?" "How can I trust a man I paid 20 years to stay out of jail when all of a sudden, the minute the little extra pressure's on, he says, go to jail? I'm not going." "You!" Yellen signaled to the noisy one. The brute started running forward. "Put this man in the wagon immediately," Yellen said. Falkbridge was starting to explain when the noisy one clubbed him across the neck. "Not so hard!" Yellen cried. The noisy one picked up Falkbridge, tried dusting his clothes.
Is he alive?
Yellen asked.
See, I don't know you wanted him breathing in the wagon. I thought you only wanted him in the wagon, breathing or not. So, enough!
Yellen interrupted, and, upset, he hurried out of the alehouse, while the noisy one brought Falkbridge.
Is that everyone, then?
Yellen asked, as various brutes were visible leaving the thieves' quarter pulling various wagons.
I think there's still a fencer with the brandy, the noisy one began. See, I tried getting him out yesterday, but I can't be bothered with a drunk. I'm an important man. Get him out of here and do it now, both of you. Take the wagon with you and be quick. This quarter must be locked and deserted by sundown, or the prince will be mad at me, and I don't like it much when the prince is mad at me.
We're going, the noisy one replied, and he hurried off, letting the quiet one bring the wagon with Falkbridge inside.
I tried getting his fencer yesterday, some of the standard enforcers. It seems as he has certain sword skills that made him wary, but I think I have a trick that will work.
The quiet one hurried along behind, dragging the wagon. They rounded a corner, and from around another corner, just up ahead, a kind of drunken mumbling was starting to get louder.
I'm getting you very bored, Vizzini, came from out of sight. 3 months is a long time to wait, especially for a passionate Spaniard.
Much louder now.
And I am very passionate, Vizzini, and you are nothing but a tardy Sicilian. So if you're not here in 90 more days, I'm done with you. You hear? Done!
Much softer now.
I didn't mean that, Vizzini. I just low my filthy stoop. Take your time.
The noisy brute slowed.
That kind of talk goes on all day. Ignore it, and keep the wagon out of sight.
The quiet one pushed the wagon almost to the corner and stopped it.
Stay with the wagon,
the noisy one added, and then whispered,
Here comes my trick.
With that, he walked alone around the corner and stared ahead at the skinny fellow sitting clutching the brandy bottle on the stoop.
How there, friend, the noisy one said. I'm not moving. Keep your hold there, said the brandy drinker. Hear me through, please. I've been sent by Prince Humperdinck himself, who's in need of entertainment. Tomorrow's our country's 500th anniversary, and the dozen greatest tumblers and fencers and entertainers are at this very moment competing. The finest pair will compete personally tomorrow for the new bride and groom. Now, as to why I'm here, yesterday some of my friends tried rousting you, and they said later that you resisted with some splendid sword work. So, if you'd like, I, at great personal sacrifice, will rush you to the fencing contest where, if you are as good as I'm told, you might have yet the honor of entertaining the royal couple tomorrow. Do you think you could win such a competition? Breezing. Then hurry while there's still time to enter.
The Spaniard managed to stand. He unsheathed his sword and flashed it a few times across the morning. The noisy one took a few quick steps backward and said,
No time to waste. Come along now.
Well, then the drunk started yelling,
I'm waiting for Vizzini.
Meanie?
I'm not mean. I'm just following the rule.
Cruel.
Not cruel, not mean. Can't you understand?
And here his voice trailed off for a moment as he squinted. Then quietly he said,
Fezzik?
From behind the noisy one, the quiet one said,
Who's Fezzik?
Inigo took a step from his stoop, trying desperately to make his eyes focus through the brandy.
Fezzik? Is that a joke you made?
The quiet one said,
Played.
Inigo gave a cry and started staggering forward.
Fezzik, it's you!
Through! And he reached out, grabbed Inigo just before he stumbled, brought him back to an upright position.
Hold him just like that,
the noisy brute said, and he moved in quickly, right arm raised, as he had done to Falkbridge.
Splat!
Fezzik dumped the noisy brute into the wagon beside Falkbridge, covered them both with a soiled blanket, then hurried back to Inigo, whom he had left leaning propped against the building.
It's just so good to see you,
Fezzik said then.
Oh, it is. It is, but...
Inigo's voice was winding steadily down now.
I'm too weak for surprises. were the last words he got out before he fainted from fatigue and brandy and no food and bad sleep and lots of other things, none of them nutritious. Fezzik hoisted him up with one arm, took the wagon in the other, and hurried back to Falkbridge's house. He carried Inigo inside, placed him upstairs on Falkbridge's feather bed, then hurried away to the entrance of the thieves' quarter, dragging the wagon behind him. He made very sure that the dirty blanket covered both the victims, and outside the entrance of the brute squad held a boot count of those they had removed. The total came out right, and by 11 in the morning, the great walled thieves' quarter was officially empty and padlocked. Released from active duty, Fezzik followed the wall around to a quiet place and waited. He was alone. Walls were never any problem for him, not so long as his arms worked, and he quickly scaled this one and hurried back through the quiet streets to Falkbridge's house. He made some tea, carried it upstairs, force-fed Inigo. Within a couple moments, Inigo was blinking under his own power. "It's just so good to see you," Fezzik said then. "Oh, it is, Inigo agreed. "And I'm sorry for fainting, but I have done nothing for 90 days but wait for Vizzini and drink brandy, and a surprise like seeing you, well, that was just too much for me on an empty stomach. But I am fine now." "Good," Fezzik said. "Vizzini is dead." "He is, eh? Dead, you say? And then he fainted again. Fezzik began berating himself. "Oh, you stupid! If there's a right way and a wrong way, trust you to find the dumb way. Fool, back to the beginning was the rule." Fezzik really felt idiotic then, because after months of forgetting, now that he didn't need to remember any more, he remembered. He hurried downstairs and made some tea and brought some crackers and honey and fed Inigo again. When Inigo blinked, Fezzik said, "Rest." "Thank you, my friend. No more fainting." And he closed his eyes and slept for an hour. Fezzik busied himself in Falkbridge's kitchen. He really didn't know how to prepare a proper meal, but he could heat and he could cool, and he could sniff the good meat from the rotted, so it wasn't too great a task to finally end up with something that once looked like roast beef, and another thing that could have been a potato. The unexpected smell of hot food brought Inigo around, and he lay in bed, eating every bite Fezzik fed him. "I never realized I was in such terrible condition," Inigo said, chewing away. "Shh, you'll be fine now," Fezzik said, cutting another piece of meat, putting it into Inigo's mouth. Inigo chewed it carefully down. "First, you appearing so suddenly, and then, on top of that, the business of Vizzini. It was too much for me." "It would have been too much for anybody. Just rest." Fezzik began to cut another piece of meat. "I feel such a baby, so helpless," Inigo said, taking the next bite, chewing away. "You'll be as strong as ever by sundown," Fezzik promised, getting the next piece of meat ready. "The six-fingered man is named Count Rugen, and he's here right now in Florence City." "Interesting," Inigo managed this time, before he fainted again. Fezzik stood over the still figure. "Well, it is so good to see you," he said. "Then it's been such a long time, and I just got so much news." Inigo only lay there. Fezzik hurried to Falkbridge's tub and plugged it up, and after a lot of work he got it filled with steaming water, and then he dunked Inigo in, holding him down with one hand, holding Inigo's mouth shut with the other, and when the brandy began to sweat from the Spaniard's body, Fezzik emptied the tub and filled it again, with icy water this time, and back he plunged Inigo. And when that water began to warm a bit, back he filled the tub with steaming stuff, and back went Inigo. And now the brandy was really oozing from his pores, and that was how it went, hour after hour. Hot to icy cold to steaming hot, and then some tea, and then some toast, and then some steaming hot again, and more icy cold, and then a nap, and then more toast, and less tea, but the longest steamer yet, and this time there wasn't much brandy left inside, and one final icy cold, and then a 2-hour sleep until, by mid-afternoon, they sat downstairs in Falkbridge's kitchen, and now at last, for the first time in 90 days, Inigo's eyes were almost bright. His hands did shake, but not all that noticeably. And perhaps the Inigo of before the brandy would have bested this fellow now in 60 minutes of solid fencing, but not too many other masters in the world would have survived for 5.
Inigo nodded. "All right, again. And this time, please be brief. From the beginning, the man in black. Did he get by you?"
"Yes, fairly too. Strength against strength. I was too slow and out of practice."
"Then it was he that killed Vizzini.
"That is my belief."
Did he use his sword or his strength?" Fezzik tried to remember.
There weren't any sword wounds, and Vizini didn't seem broken. There were just these two goblets and Vizini dead. Poison is my guess.
Why would Vizini take poison? Fezzik hadn't the least idea. But he was definitely dead. Fezzik was positive. Inigo began to pace the kitchen, his movements quick and sharp, the way his movements were before. All right, Vizini is dead, enough of that. Tell me, briefly, where is Six-Fingered Rugen is so I may kill him.
That may not be so easy, Inigo, because the Count is with the Prince, and the Prince is in his castle. And he is pledged not to leave it till after his wedding, for he fears another sneak attack from Gilder. And all the entrances but the main one are sealed for safety, and the main doors are guarded by 20 men. Inigo said, pacing faster now. If you fought 5 and I fenced 5, that would mean 10 gone, which would be bad because that would also mean 10 left and they would kill us. But, and now he picked up his pace even more. If you should take 6 and I took 8, that would mean 14 beaten, which should not be as bad but still bad enough, since the 6 remaining would kill us. And now he whirled on Fezzik. How many could you handle at the most? Well, some of them are from the Blue Squad, so I don't think more than 8.
Leaving me 12, which is not impossible, but not the best way to spend your first evening after 3 months on brandy. And suddenly Inigo's body sagged, and in his eyes, bright a moment ago, now there was moisture.
What has happened?
Fezzik cried.
Oh, my friend, I need Vizini.
I am no planner. I follow. Tell me what to do, and no man alive does it better. But my mind is like fine wine. It travels badly. I go from thought to thought, but no logic. And I forget things, and help me, Fezzik, what am I to do? Fezzik wanted to cry now, too.
I am the stupidest fellow that was ever born. You know that. I couldn't remember to come back here even after you made that special lovely rhyme for me.
I need Vizini.
But Vizini is dead.
And then Inigo was up again, blazing about the kitchen, and for the first time his fingers were snapping with excitement. I don't need Vizini. I need his master. I need a man in black. Look, he bested me with steel, my greatness. He bested you with strength, yours. He must have a plan and out of Vizini, and he will tell me how to break through the castle and kill the 6-fingered beast. If you have the least notion what a man in black is at this moment, relate quickly the answer.
He sails the 7 seas with the dread pirate Roberts.
Why would he do such a thing like that?
Because he is a sailor for the dread pirate Roberts.
A sailor? A common sailor? A common ordinary seaman beast best the great Inigo Montoya with a sword? Inconceivable! He must be the dread pirate Roberts. Otherwise it makes no sense.
In any event, he is sailing far away. Count Rugen says so, and the prince himself gave the order. The prince wants no pirates around, and with all the trouble he's having with Gilder, remember, they kidnapped the princess once. They might try...
Fezzik! We kidnapped the princess once. You never were strong on memory, but even you should recall that we put the Gilder uniform pieces under the princess's saddle. Vizini did it because he was under orders to do it. Someone wanted Gilder to look guilty. And who but a noble would want that? And what noble more than a war-loving prince himself? We never knew who hired Vizini. I guess Humperdinck. And as for the Count's word on the man in black's whereabouts, since the Count is the same man who slaughtered my father, we can rest assured he is certainly a terrific fellow. He started for the door. Come! We have much to do. Fezzik followed him through the darkening streets of the thieves' quarter.
You'll explain things to me as we go along?
Fezzik asked. I'll explain them to you now. His blade-like body knifed on through the quiet streets, Fezzik hurrying alongside. A. I need to reach Count Rugen at last to avenge my father. B. I cannot plan on how to reach Count Rugen. C. Vizini could have planned it for me, but C prime. Vizini is unavailable. However, D. The man in black outplanned Vizini. So, therefore, E. The man in black can get me to Count Rugen.
But I told you, Prince Humperdinck, after he captured him, gave orders for all to hear that the man in black was to be returned safely to his ship. Everyone in Florin knows this to be so.
A. Prince Humperdinck had some plans to kill his fiancée and hired us to carry them out. But B. The man in black ruined Prince Humperdinck's plans. However, eventually, C. Prince Humperdinck managed to capture the man in black, and as everybody in Florence City also knows, Prince Humperdinck has a terrible temper. So, therefore, D. If a man has a terrible temper, what could be more fun than losing it against a very fellow who spoiled your plans to kill your fiancée?
They had reached the thieves' quarter wall now. Inigo jumped onto Fezzik's shoulders, and Fezzik started to climb.
Conclusion 1.
Inigo continued, not missing a beat.
Since the prince is in Florence City taking out his temper on the man in black, the man in black must also be in Florence City. Conclusion 2. The man in black must not be too happy with his present situation. Conclusion 3. I am in Florence City and need a planner to avenge my father, while he is in Florence City and needs a rescuer to salvage his future. And when people have equal needs of each other, conclusion 4 and final, deals are made.
Fezzik reached the top of the wall and started carefully climbing down the other side.
I understand everything, he said.
You understand nothing, but it really doesn't matter, since what you mean is you're glad to see me, just as I'm glad to see you, because no more loneliness.
That's what I mean, Fezzik said.
It was dusk when they began their search blindly through all of Florence City. Dusk, a day before the wedding. Count Rugen was about to begin his nightly experiments at that dusk, gathering up his notebooks from his room, filled with all his jottings. 5 levels underground, behind high castle walls, locked and chained and silent, Wesley waited beside the machine. In a way, he still looked like Wesley, except, of course, that he had been broken. 20 years of his life had been sucked away. 20 were left. Pain was anticipation. Soon the Count would come again. Against any wishes he had left, Wesley went on crying. It was dusk when Buttercup went to see the prince. She knocked loudly, waited, knocked again. She could hear him shouting inside, and if it had not been so important, she would never have knocked the 3rd time, but she did, and the door was yanked open, and the look of anger on his face immediately changed to the sweetest smile.
Beloved, he said, come in. A moment more is all I need.
And he turned back to Yellen.
Look at her, Yellen, my bride-to-be. Has any man ever been so blessed?
Yellen shook his head.
Am I wrong, do you think, to go to any length, then, to protect her?
Yellen shook his head again. The prince was driving him crazy with his stories of the Gilder infiltration. Yellen had every spy he'd ever used working day and night, and not one of them had come up with anything about Gilder. And yet the prince insisted. Inwardly, Yellen sighed. It was beyond him. He was simply an enforcer, not a prince. In fact, the only remotely disturbing news he'd heard since he'd closed the thieves' quarter that morning was within the hour, when someone told him of a rumor that the ship of the dread pirate Roberts had perhaps been seen sailing all the way into Florence Channel itself. But such a thing, Yellen knew from long experience, was simply rumor.
I'll tell you, they are everywhere, these Gilders, the prince went on. And since you seem unable to stop them, I wish to change my plans. All the gates have been sealed to my castle except for the front one, yes? Yes, and 20 men guard it. Add 80 more. I want 100 men, clear? 100 men it will be, every brute available. Inside the castle I'm quite safe. I have my own supplies, food, stables, enough. As long as they cannot get at me, I will survive. These, then, are the new and final plans. Jot them down. All 500th anniversary arrangements are cancelled until after the wedding. The wedding is tomorrow at sunset. My bride and I will ride my whites to Florence Channel, surrounded by all your enforcers. There we will board a ship and begin our long-awaited honeymoon, surrounded by every ship in the Florin Armada.
Every ship but 4, Buttercup corrected. He blinked at her a moment in silence. Then he said, blowing her a kiss, but discreetly so Yellen couldn't see, Yes, how forgetful I am. Every ship but 4. He turned back to Yellen. But in his blink, in that following silence, Buttercup had seen it all.
Those ships will stay with us until I deem it safe to release them. Of course, Gilder could attack then, but that is a chance we must risk. Let me think if there's anything else.
The prince loved giving orders, especially the kind he knew would never need carrying out. Also, Yellen was a slow jotter, and that only added to the fun.
Excused.
the prince said finally. With a bow, Yellen was gone. The 4 ships were never sent, Buttercup said when they were alone. Don't bother lying to me any more.
Whatever was done for your own good, Sweet Pudding.
Somehow I do not think so.
You're nervous, I'm nervous. We're getting married tomorrow. We've got a right to be.
You couldn't be more wrong, you know. I'm very calm. And in truth, she did seem that way. It doesn't matter whether you sent the ships or not. Wesley will come for me. There is a God, I know that. And there is love, I know that too. So Wesley will save me.
You're a silly girl. Now go to your room.
Yes, I am a silly girl, and yes again, I will go to my room. And you are a coward with a heart filled with nothing but fear. The prince had to laugh.
The greatest hunter in the world, and you say I'm a coward.
I do indeed. I'm getting much smarter as I age. I say you are a coward, and you are. I think you hunt only to reassure yourself that you are not what you are, the weakest thing to ever walk the earth. He will come for me, and then we will be gone, and you will be helpless for all your hunting, because Wesley and I are joined by the bond of love, and you cannot track that, not with 1,000 bloodhounds, and you cannot break it, not with 1,000 swords. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet, and down the long curving corridor to her room, where he tore the door open and threw her inside and locked her there, and started running for the underground entrance to the Zoo of Death.
My father stopped reading. Go on, I said. Lost my place, he said, and I waited there, still weak with pneumonia and wet with fear until he started reading again. Inigo allowed Fezzik to open the door. Hey, I said. Hold it, that's not right. You skipped. And then I quick caught my tongue because we had just had that scene where I got all upset about Buttercup marrying Humperdinck when I'd accused him of skipping. I didn't want any repeat of that. Daddy, I said, I don't mean anything or anything, but wasn't the prince sort of running toward the zoo, and then the next thing you said was about Inigo, and maybe, shouldn't there be a pager like that in between? My father started to close the book. I'm not fighting, please, don't close it. It is not for that, he said, and then he looked at me for a long time. Billy, he said. He almost never called me that. I loved it when he did. Anybody else, I hated it. But when the barber did it, I don't know. I just melted. Billy, do you trust me? What is that? Of course I do. Billy, you got pneumonia. And you're taking this book very serious. I know because we already fought once about it. I'm not fighting anymore. Listen to me. I never lied to you yet. Did I? Okay. Trust me. I don't want to read you the rest of this chapter, and I want you to say it's all right. Why? What happens in the rest of this chapter? If I tell you, I could accomplish the same by reading. Just say okay. I can't say that until I know what happens. But tell me what happens, and I'll tell you if it's okay. If I promise, if I don't want to hear it, you can skip on to Inigo. You won't do me this favor? I'll sneak out of bed when you're asleep. I don't care when you hide the book. I'll find it, and I'll read the rest of the chapter myself, so you might as well tell me. Billy, please. I got you. You might as well admit it. My father sighed this terrible sound. I knew I had him beaten then. Wesley dies, my father said. I said, what do you mean Wesley dies? You mean he dies? My father nodded. Prince Humperdinck kills him. He's only faking though, right? My father shook his head, closed the book all the way. Oh, shit, I said, and I started to cry. I'm sorry, my father said. I'll leave you alone. And he left me. Who gets Humperdinck? I screamed after him. He stopped in the hall. I don't understand. Who kills Prince Humperdinck? At the end, somebody's got to get him? Is it Fezzik? Who? Nobody kills him. He lives. You mean he wins, Daddy? Jesus, what have you been reading me this thing for? And I buried my head in my pillow. I never cried like that again. Not once to this day. I could feel almost my heart emptying into my pillow.
I guess the most amazing thing about crying, though, is that when you're in it, you think it'll go on forever, but it never really lasts half what you think. Not in terms of real time. In terms of real emotions, it's worse than you think, but not by the clock. When my father came back, it couldn't have been even an hour later. So, he said, shall we go on tonight or not? Shoot, I told him. Eyes dry, no catch in the throat, nothing. Fire when ready. With Inigo. Let's hear the murder, I said. I knew I wasn't about to bawl again. Like buttercups, my heart was now a secret garden, and the walls were very high. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet and down the long curving corridor to her room, where he tore the door open and threw her inside and locked her there, and started running for the underground entrance to the zoo of death. And down he plunged, giant stride after giant stride, and when he threw the door of the fifth-level cage open, even Count Rugen was startled by the purity of whatever the emotion was that reflected in the prince's eyes. The prince moved to Wesley. "She loves you," the prince cried. "She loves you still, and you love her. So think of that. Think of this, too. In all the world, you might have been happy, genuinely happy. Not one couple in a century has that chance. Not really. No matter what the storybooks say. But you could have had it. And so, I would think no one will ever suffer a greater loss as you." And with that, he grabbed the dial and pushed it all the way forward, and the count cried, "Not at 20!" But by then it was too late. The death scream had started. It was much worse than the scream of the wild dog. In the first place, the dial for the wild dog had only been set at 6, whereas this was more than triple that. And so, naturally enough, it was more than 3 times as long, and more than 3 times as loud. But none of this really was why it was worse. It was a scream from a human throat that made the difference. In her chamber, Buttercup heard it, and it frightened her, but she had not the least idea what it was. By the main door of the castle, Yellen heard it, and it also frightened him, though he couldn't imagine what it was either. All the 100 brutes and fighters flanked by the main door heard it too, and to a man they were bothered by it, and they talked it over for quite a while, but none of them had any sound notions as to what it might have been. The great square was filled with common people excited about the coming wedding and anniversary, and they all heard it too, and no one even made the pretense of not being scared. But again, none of them knew at all what it might have been. The death scream rose higher in the night. All the streets leading into the square were also filled with citizens, all trying to crowd into the square, and they heard it. But once they admitted they were petrified, they gave up trying to guess what it might have been. Inigo knew immediately. In the tiny alley that he and Fezzik were trying to force their way through, he stopped, remembering. The alley led to the streets that led to the square, and the alley was jammed too.
"I don't like the sound,"
Fezzik said, his skin, for the moment, cold. Inigo grabbed the giant, and the words began pouring out. "Fezzik, Fezzik, that is the sound of ultimate suffering. I know that sound. That was the sound in my heart when the Count Rugen slaughtered my father and I saw him fall. The man in black makes it now."
"You think that's him?"
"Who else has cause for ultimate suffering this celebration night?" And with that, he started to follow the sound. But the crowds were in his way, and he was strong, but he was thin, and he cried, "Fezzik, Fezzik, we must track this down. We must trace it to its source. I cannot move, so you must lead me. Fly, Fezzik. This is Inigo begging you. Make a path, please." Well, Fezzik had rarely had anyone beg him for anything, least of all Inigo, and when something like that happened, you did what you could. So Fezzik, without waiting, began to push. Forward. Lots of people. Fezzik pushed harder. Lots of people began to move. Out of Fezzik's way. Fast. The death scream was starting to fade now, fading in the clouds. "Fezzik!" said Inigo. "Harder your power! Now!" Down the alley Fezzik ran, people screaming and diving to get out of his way, and in his footsteps Inigo kept pace. And at the end of the alley was a street, and the scream was fainter now. But Fezzik turned left, and into the middle of the street he went, and he owned it. No one was in his way, nothing dared block his way, and the scream was getting just so hard to hear. So with all his might, Fezzik roared, "Quiet!" And the street was suddenly hushed. and Fezzik pounded along. Inigo right behind, and the scream was still there, still faintly there, and into the great square itself, and the castle beyond, before the scream was gone. Wesley lay dead by the machine. The prince kept the dial by the 20 mark long after it was necessary, until the count said, "Done." The prince left without another look at Wesley. He took the secret underground stairs 4 at a time. "She actually called me a coward," he said, and then he was gone from sight. Count Rugen started taking notes. Then he threw his quill pen down. He tested Wesley briefly, then he shook his head. Death was not of any intellectual interest to him at all. When you were dead, you couldn't react to pain. The count said, "Dispose of the body," because even though he couldn't see the albino, he knew the albino was there. It was really a shame. He realized as he mounted the stairs after the prince, you just didn't come across victims like Wesley every day of the year. When they were gone, the albino came out, pulled the cups from the corpse, decided to burn the body on the garbage pyre back behind the castle, which meant a wheelbarrow. He hurried up the underground stairs, came out the secret entrance, moved quickly to the main tool shed. All the wheelbarrows were buried back at the rear wall, behind the hoes and rakes and hedge trimmers. The albino made a hissing sound of displeasure and began to pick his way past all the other equipment. This kind of thing always seemed to happen to him when he was in a hurry. The albino hissed again. Extra work all the time. Wouldn't you just know it? He finally got the barrow out and was just passing the false and deadly supposed main entrance to the zoo when "I'm having the devil's own trouble tracking that scream," was spoken to him, and the albino whirled to find there in the castle grounds, a blade-thin stranger with a sword in his hand. The sword suddenly flicked its way to the albino's throat. "Where's the man in black?" the swordsman said. He had a giant scar slanting down each cheek and seemed like no one to trifle with. Whispered, "I don't know, man in black." "Did the scream come from that place?" The fellow indicated the main entrance. Nod. "Any throat it came from? I need this man, so be quick." Whispered, "Wesley." Inigo reasoned. "A sailor, brought here by Rugen." Nod. "And I reach him where?" The albino hesitated, then pointed to the deadly entrance. Whispered, "He's on the bottom level, 5 levels down." "Then I have no more need of you. Quiet him for a while, Fezzik." From behind him, the albino was aware of a giant shadow moving. Funny, he thought. The last thing he remembered. I thought it was a tree. Inigo was on fire now. There was no stopping him. Fezzik hesitated by the main door.
Why would he tell the truth?
He's a zookeeper threatened with death. Why would he lie?
That doesn't follow.
I don't care, Inigo said sharply, and in fact he didn't. He knew in his heart the man in black was down there. There was no other reason for Fezzik to find him, for Fezzik to know of Rugen, for everything to be coming together after so many years of waiting. If there was a god, then there was a man in black waiting. Inigo knew that. He knew it. And of course, he was absolutely right. But again, of course, there were many things he did not know. That the man in black was dead, for one. That the entrance they were taking was the wrong one, for another, a false one, set up to foil those, like himself, who did not belong. There were spitting cobras down there, though what would actually come at him would be worse. These things he did not know either. But his father had to be revenged, and the man in black would figure out how. That was enough for Inigo. And so, with an urgency that would soon turn to deep regret, he and Fezzik approached the Zoo of Death. And that is the end of Chapter 6. Join us next time as we get to the thrilling conclusion of The Princess Bride in Chapter 7, The Wedding. At least I think. There might be another chapter after that. I don't really remember. But the next part is one of my favorites, with Inigo and Fezzik entering the Zoo of Death. See you next time.